Hi, this is Dr. Brian Armstrong, and this is the first of what will be 3 PowerPoint slide presentations on Edo period Japan. The aim of this first slide presentation is to provide historical context for Basho and Hokusai, who were artists who worked in the Edo period of Japan. As for the image you see, it is a picture of a bay, a harbor in Japan, and it shows the artificial island of Dejima at the bottom of the painting. This is the artificial island built so that the Dutch could land there and trade with the Japanese without ever setting foot on Japanese soil during the Edo period. More on that in a moment. We'll start with a quote, and the quote is from the old Norton anthology that we used in the old humanities, and it describes the Japanese genius. Quote, "Japan has demonstrated a genius for knowing when and what to learn from others, and they are compelled to improve perpetually on the original, whether it be Confucian theories of government or Henry Ford's assembly line. They are also motivated to innovate. The tea ceremony, the multicolor woodblock print, kabuki, haiku, and sumo all spring from native soil." End quote. One of the most fertile periods of such innovation and adaptation is found in Edo period Japan. The purpose of this lecture is, again, to introduce you to this period. In what follows, you will find some general historical context for the Edo period, and it should be noted that slides 4 through 8 are directly from Wikipedia, and they are in a black font. We will also see a few cultural values that should be noted. They're central to the Japanese perspective, but we will not necessarily use them in our investigation of Basho and Hokusai. We'll take a look at the source of the value of nature in Japan, and we'll look briefly at the influence of Chinese philosophy. So, the Edo period, also called the Tokugawa period, is the period between 1603 and 1868 in the history of Japan, when Japanese society was under the rule of the Tokugawa shogunate. The shogunate is a form of political rule in which a shogun rules society. A shogun would be a high-level military official, such as a general. The period was characterized by economic growth, strict social order, isolationist foreign policies, sustainable forest management policies, and popular enjoyment of arts and culture. You will find on Desire to Learn a brief edited version of the Wikipedia entry on the Edo period. In the next few slides, I'll just note some high points from this period's history. First, seclusion and stability. The first goal of the newly established Tokugawa shogunate was to pacify the country after a period of internal turmoil. It created a balance of power that remained fairly stable for the next 250 years, and it was heavily influenced by Confucian principles of social order. Also, the Edo period began during a trade period in which there was intense interaction with European powers. The first Edo shogun saw this as problematic and gradually introduced restrictions, culminating in the Closed Country Edict of 1635, which prohibited any Japanese from traveling outside Japan or, if they left, from ever returning. In 1636, the Dutch were restricted to Dejima, which was a small artificial island in Nagasaki's harbor, built so that the Dutch could continue to trade with the Japanese without ever leaving or stepping onto Japanese soil. Thanks to this port, Edo period saw the rise of a vital commercial sector and burgeoning urban centers, a relatively well-educated elite, a sophisticated government bureaucracy, productive agriculture, a closely unified nation with highly developed financial and marketing systems, and a national infrastructure of roads. And I think I said at the start of that bullet point that this is thanks to the artificial island. Actually, one might say that it's because of the seclusion that this intense internal development was able to take place. Obviously, I would say obviously, having some connection to the outside world was of course vital. This urbanization, however, was joined with a keen sense at the level of political and economic policy of the value of the land. Rice remained the base of the economy, and the Edo developed Japan's first forest management policy in response to widespread deforestation. There was also much artistic and intellectual development. During the period, Japan progressively studied Western sciences and techniques through the information and books received from the Dutch traders in Dejima. The flourishing of Neo-Confucianism was the major intellectual development of the period. Also, for the first time, urban populations had the means and leisure time to support a new mass culture. Their search for enjoyment became known as ukiyo, the floating world, an ideal world of fashion, popular entertainment, and the discovery of aesthetic qualities in objects and actions of everyday life, including sex. The increasing interest of the new urban middle and upper classes in pursuing recreational activities helped to develop an array of new industries, many of which could be found in an area known as Yoshiwara. Yoshiwara, a pleasure district of Edo, became a destination for the elite and wealthy merchants who wished to flaunt their fortune. However, these urbanites were also intensely interested in poetry, and the Edo period saw the rise of a game called haikai, in which people would go around in a ring, writing impromptu haiku in response to the poem written by the person next to them. This will be covered more fully in the Basho lecture. So, to sum up, a bourgeois mercantile class quickly rose to power in the Edo period in response to the needs of urban peacetime samurai who ran the bureaucracy on behalf of the Edo shogun. Power during this time became financial rather than political. Art reflected their urban culture. It was fast, varied, crowded, competitive. People lived by wits and appreciated wit, and popular literature became big business. To appeal to an urban audience, artists had to move at a fast clip, and style was essential. The urban audience demanded realism over noble romance and martial prowess, and for the first time, ordinary people became standard literary characters. Basho will be one. So that is some historical context from the Edo period. Second, I want to note some of the key Japanese cultural values that are central to the Japanese perspective, but which we may not be able to apply in our works, although I have a feeling they will come in handy. First is the distinction between iri and ninjo. Iri are social obligations, and they are often in conflict with ninjo, which are personal feelings. Two related concepts are tatame and hone. Tatame is one's public face, and you can see on the left a mask representing someone's public face. Hone are one's true feelings, and so if you were to look at the other side of that mask, you would see the image down in the right-hand corner. The avoidance of conflict in Japanese society involves fulfilling one's iri by putting on an appropriate tatame. Ninjo, personal feelings, however, are important, and one often needs to find appropriate ways to express his or her hone, or true feelings, without disrupting tatame. This need to express one's true feelings while maintaining a certain public face will be central to the subtlety and psychological insight of Japanese art and literature. 3. The source of nature in Japan, what we might call the mark of the past. The Japanese, remained hunters and gatherers while the West and China were developing. The Japanese then had to play catch-up. It was not until the 3rd century BCE that rice cultivation arrived, and a nomadic way of life was exchanged for an agricultural one. Villages then arose. This arrival of agriculture in Japan is much later than the arrival of agriculture in, say, Greece, India, or China. The wanderer's past left its mark on Japanese civilization in many ways. It gave them an ingrained sense of the impermanence of things. It gave them an acute awareness of the changes brought by the seasons. And it gave them a taste for the spare, the unrefined, the natural, even when prodigious artifice would sometimes be required to produce something natural. And keep that point in mind. Sometimes it takes a great deal of artifice to produce something that truly appears natural. Fourth and final, the influence of China. Chinese philosophy was a major influence during this period. In particular, there is the influence of Buddhism, and we will look at that more fully in the Buddhism lecture. In particular, we see the value of the submission of the individual will to the greater needs of the group. This was an aspect of Chinese society that the Japanese valued also. New governors quickly imported the superior fruits of Chinese civilization in the 7th and 8th centuries. The Chinese model initially proved a poor fit. The Chinese model was egalitarian and meritocratic, whereas Japan put an emphasis on family and kinship ties, which were inherently unstable in the Chinese system. The Edo period shogunate attempted to remedy this and make society more stable through Confucian means. As for the Buddhist influence, it is a particular kernel of Japanese literature, and Buddhism, in the form of literature, will sprout luxuriantly in Japan. This literature aimed to plumb the depths of longing. However, the Japanese were a profoundly practical people not given to metaphysics, and they thus addressed the larger questions of human nature more obliquely, in works praised for their subtle psychological insight. Again, this too will be covered in the Buddhism lecture. We'll leave it at that. That gives us plenty with which to work. And these final two slides just ask you to quickly think over what the slides just presented. So now would be a good time to try to summarize or note, from memory if possible, some of the Edo period context that you just encountered. Next, note some aspects of the work of Basho and Hokusai to which you might apply this context. You might also wonder why Basho's and Hokusai's work would have resonated so fully in such a context. In other words, how might their poetic, Buddhistic representations of nature or an encounter with nature be attractive in the context of the fast-paced, urban ukiyo of Edo period Japan?